The 1960s heralded the rise of what's known as the Big Three, the trio of vehicle manufacturers comprised of Chrysler, Ford, and General Motors. Together, along with several other American brands, these manufacturers dominated the market. Economy, luxury, and power-hungry muscle cars flooded the market as the American car industry boomed. In this video, we're going to take a little trip down memory lane and look at some of the elegant, innovative, and sporty cars from the 1960s. Facts First presents the most popular cars from the 60s. Did you own one? Ford Mustang. As far as sports cars go, the Mustang arguably made the most significant impact when it debuted in the 60s. It was first shown off at the New York World Fair in 1964, and the Mustang line has continued to adapt to the ever-changing demands and desires of the sports car market. Car lovers everywhere immediately fell in love with the long hooded and short-decked silhouette of this iconic vehicle. It was also desirable because of how it offered consumers a ton of power and performance at a relatively affordable price. Ford could barely keep the Mustang in stock. Demand was through the roof. Initially, Ford expected to move more than 100,000 units in its first year, but within 3 months, they had already met that target. By the end of the decade, Ford had produced more than 2 million Mustangs. Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow. Rolls-Royce defined what a luxury vehicle could be when they introduced their Silver Shadow in 1965. Its name alone is something to marvel at, but beyond nomenclature, it featured a hydro-pneumatic rear suspension system, much like the one featured in the Citroën DS. The Silver Shadow also boasted groundbreaking features like electric adjustable seats and split-level air conditioning. Underneath the hood, the Silver Shadow was equipped with a 172 horsepower, 6.2-liter V8 engine that was more than capable of accelerating its 4,600-pound body without needing to be ear-piercingly loud. By 1980, when production of the model ended, Rolls-Royce had produced and sold more than 28,000 units despite its hefty $70,000 price tag. Alpine A110. This beautiful, lightweight, rear-engine sports car performed like a dream, both on and off the road. It weighed just a little under 1,600 pounds, and thanks to its inline 4-cylinder engine, it was capable of putting out almost 140 horsepower. Since all that power was strapped to its rear, this iconic French sports car liked to swing its tail around turns like an uber-excited dog. The Alpine A110 featured a fiberglass body, which made it especially lightweight and nimble. In 1973 alone, it won 6 WRC events, proving it was a force to be reckoned with. In 2017, the Alpine was revived, and honestly, it's everything that it was back in its heyday, perhaps more. Datsun 240Z. Before Nissan took over the category, Datsun was the original creator of the fan-favorite Z division of sports cars. The 240Z boasted a 2.4-liter inline-6 engine and used every bit of its 150 horsepower to maximum potential by sending it through a 5-speed stick shift to the rear wheels. While it wasn't remarkably fast, it did have a decent 125 miles per hour top speed and could go from 0 to 60 in just under 8 seconds. Chevrolet Camaro. The Camaro was GM's answer to their rival Ford's Mustang, which was booming in popularity at the time. But don't think the Camaro was just some kind of quick-to-the-market reactionary copycat. It was a unique beast that held its own. The first Camaros were essentially clones of the Chevy Nova, borrowing several of the Nova's mechanical designs and parts. The car hit the lot in 1966, and by the end of the year, it had sold more than 220,000 units. That's even more impressive when you consider how the Mustang sold approximately 480,000 the same year. Throughout its history, the Camaro's popularity continued to skyrocket, partly because racing enthusiasts had taken quite a liking to it. By the end of the 60s, it became one of the most popular vehicles on the market. Ford Bronco. This iconic vehicle was initially conceived as an alternative to rival offerings like the Jeep CJ and the Harvester Scout. Banking on the success of the Mustang, the Bronco rolled into lots across America beginning in 1966. Folks had a choice of 3 models. You could get it as a wagon, pickup, or roadster, all of which featured a 2-door layout. The first Broncos were manuals, and their transitions were mated to either inline-6 or V8 engines, depending on the model. The Bronco's popularity continued to increase, and today it's considered to be one of the manufacturer's most iconic offerings. Buick Riviera. Buick's iconic luxury coupe set out to conquer a segment of the market that previously was dominated by Ford's Thunderbird. The vehicle featured distinct design aesthetics that made it instantaneously identifiable, including its prominent egg crate grille and a series of creased lines that ran along the rear and front quarters of its body. The Riviera's interior was also quite extravagant. Because of this and its powerful performance, the public began to take notice of this new entry into the luxury car market and began buying up all of Buick's stock. Dealerships struggled to keep the Riviera in stock throughout its run, which lasted from 1963 to 65. More than 112,000 Rivieras were sold. Ford Thunderbird. This snazzy sports car was the most popular luxury coupe of the decade. It held this distinct honor virtually unchallenged until the unveiling of the Buick Riviera. Production started in '57, but Ford made a few tweaks to its design in 1960. All of these changes, for the most part, were cosmetic. Perhaps the most noteworthy was the addition of a third taillight. 1960 was a record-breaking year for the T-Bird, as Ford moved an astonishing 92,000 units. As the decade continued, Ford implemented several other modifications to the car. By 1969, 3 more Thunderbird iterations were introduced to the market. VW Beetle. This iconic vehicle has a spellbinding history, although that's not surprising considering it was in production from 1938 until 2003. The most famous incarnation, the Type 1, sold more than 21 million units. The tiny yet surprisingly agile car was fun to drive, fairly affordable, and quite reliable. The Beetle helped pave the way for Volkswagen to offer consumers more expensive luxury cars under its Audi brand, which they took over in 1965. The original Bug was made in Mexico, and while it's been discontinued since 2003, there are rumors floating around that the Beetle might be coming back in the near future as an electric vehicle. BMC Mini. If you thought the Mercedes-Benz smart car was the first tiny car, you must not have been alive during the 60s. The British Motor Corporation started producing this incredibly popular car in the early 60s, and it became a defining icon of British pop culture. The Mini helped define its era. It featured a front-wheel drive layout and space-saving transverse engine, and the combo of these features allowed for 80% of the interior usable for luggage and passengers. In 1999, the Global Automotive Elections Foundation reported that the Mini was voted as the second most influential car of the 1900s, outvoted only by the Model T. The Mini was designed by revered British automobile designer Sir Alec Isigonis, and it was produced at various plants all over the world. From 1959 to 2000, the Mini went through 4 different marques or generations. By 2000, when the Mini's production was halted, it had sold close to 5.5 million units worldwide. Pontiac GTO. With the introduction of the GTO in 1964, Pontiac tossed a bunch of gasoline onto the blazing muscle car craze that had swept across the U.S. It remained a popular choice for muscle car buffs throughout the decade and well into the following one. The GTO's name was inspired by Ferrari. It was actually presented as an options package for Pontiac's Le Mans, although it quickly caught on with the public and evolved into a full-on separate model. By placing greater emphasis on power and performance with its V8 engine, Pontiac could offer customers a car capable of churning out 325 horsepower at 4,800 rotations per minute. Dodge Charger. The first incarnation of the Charger was presented at an auto show in 1964. 2 years later, it entered into production. At first, the Charger, which was based on Dodge's Coronet, failed to sell, but Dodge decided to keep it alive while making a series of much-needed changes. In 1968, everything changed. No longer was the Charger struggling to stay afloat, but in fact, it quickly became one of the most sought-after vehicles on the market. Dodge initially intended to produce 35,000 units, but they tripled that number to keep up with the sudden influx in sales. Now it's time to hear from you. Did you ever own one of these cars? Which one of these is your favorite? Let us know in the comments section below.